Hi, I'm Jeff Ray, your host for Economic Outlook. Welcome to our show, where each week we take a deep dive into the regional economy and the people, the companies, the communities, and the projects helping our region grow. The COVID 19 pandemic has devastated the travel, tourism, leisure, and hospitality industries, with restaurants being amongst the hardest hit as a result of mandated closures and capacity limits. We'll take a closer look at the pandemic's toll on the restaurant industry with local restaurateur Kurt Janowski coming up on Economic Outlook. In 2020, food service and drinking places lost 240 billion in sales compared to the previous year, lost 2.5 million jobs, and more than 110,000 establishments closed either permanently or long term. To take a closer look at how the industry has been impacted, how restaurants have reacted, and what lies ahead for this critical industry, we're sitting down today with restaurateur Kurt Janowski, the founder and owner of the Navarre Hospitality Group. Just one other note before we get started here at W9T, we're respecting social distancing and as such have both our host and our guests joining us today virtually instead of in person. Kurt, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Kurt, I sort of teased kind of what was happening. Obviously, you've lived this for the last year or so. So we want to kind of dive into kind of the industry and how it was impacted. Before we kind of talk though, I'd like to go back in time maybe. So talk about pre-pandemic time. What was life like in the restaurant industry?
Jeff, I'd like to go back in time also.
Yeah.
So 2019 was a really strong year for us and the industry as a whole. And we started out 2020 just gangbusters. We were up about 15% across all of our segments, all our platforms, which is fantastic in January and February. Of course, March is when it really hit the fan and the world ended. But we were flying high, and all of us, my colleagues that I talked to, we were really optimistic about the future.
So Kurt, I think came as a little bit of a surprise to a lot of folks. I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams, and as you mentioned, sales were going really good. Talk about what happened. How all of a sudden you hear about this pandemic thing. How do you and your restaurant end up reacting to that?
Well, like everyone, there was first started out just some murmurs. You saw some stuff on the news, and no one really understood how serious it was going to get. Well, health professionals might have, some of them, but it came really quickly. We, in March, it got real bad, and the news was starting to report more and more cases, and some deaths, and it started to look pretty bleak. And we voluntarily closed on March 16th, which was only one day before the state then made us all close. So from March 17th till May 11th, every restaurant in the state of Indiana was closed, along with most other businesses that weren't deemed essential. We didn't know it was how long it was going to be for. Most of my colleagues, and we were no exception, furloughed everybody that worked for us on March 17th, because we didn't, for all we knew, we were done. It was definitely a possibility at that time that this could be it. So in our operation, we went and gathered all the food and all the walk-ins, because we have 11 operations at that time, and of course a lot of food on hand. And we set up like a little grocery store at the Armory, one of our venues, and had all our team members that we just laid off come and take what they need until it was gone. Then we took all the money in the safe and went and bought Meijer gift cards, and we gave those out to our team members, because don't need change in the safe. So it was really surreal to do all that. Now, as time went on, we started to prepare for when we could reopen, what reopening might look like, how many people we could serve, what kind of steps we were going to have to take to keep our guests and our staff safe.
Great. So as you're closed with sort of this uncertainty about how long I might close, at some point you start to make this decision about when you're going to, or you start to get even guidance on the mandated closures, when you can open back up. So help us walk through the the opening back up and maybe even some of the steps you had to take to do this. I think of your industry, for example, already highly regulated, with again like a new set of regulations on it. Now you're thinking about, how do I open? How do I keep safe?
Right.
Talk to us about how that went.
So there's a bunch of things. The Indiana Restaurant and Lodging Association was helpful. I got, for some reason, chosen to represent the hospitality industry in writing the guidelines for the state of Indiana. So Governor Holcomb put a little commission together, and I was the representative for hospitality. So I was in a little bit different position. So when the guidelines came out, I knew what they were going to be, or I had a good idea because I helped write them. So there was a lot of cleaning measures, of course. There was table size limits and table distancing, how far apart you could be, and then capacity limits. Those are the most important things. The other thing is that luckily this was May when we reopened, and so the weather's getting better. So outdoor dining had a large role, and it's been funny over the last 8 months, 9 months to see how things have changed as far as what we know now versus what we thought we knew then, right? It's almost all through droplets in the air, and so many of the adjustments we were making were to mitigate something that was probably didn't have as much effect as we thought then. Of course, mask wearing was part of it immediately, the biggest part of it. So, there's still some murmurings about mask and effectiveness, but since April, everybody that in our company has been in masks, of course. So it was just, it's challenging because you don't know how many guests you're going to do. You don't know if people, even if allowed to dine out, are coming. So you don't know how to prepare, how much food to buy. In the beginning, we couldn't get food because the distributors, of course, were so disruptive that they had tried to pivot and get rid of their inventory and were selling to grocery stores. And then when suddenly we were able to open and place orders, much of those orders weren't filled. So we were on a day-to-day, what's on the menu tonight kind of thing, and across all of our concepts based on what we could get. Now that didn't last real long, but it was really challenging for a while. So, and then, hey, is Mother's Day going to happen? What's Mother's Day going to look like if it does happen? We did Easter as a carry-out only meal at 2 of our restaurants. And that was interesting, right? How are people going to respond to that? How much food do you buy? How much staff? How do you keep everyone safe? How are we packaging? How are we doing touchless delivery? So everybody in our industry had to learn how to do things that they previously hadn't done. But it's a really resilient and, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in our industry, and people figured it out quickly, I'm really proud of the folks in our business who pivoted so quickly for survival.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of that pivot. So like I think of if I'm back in time, I'm in May, and offices are still closed, and although the economy is opening back up a lot, not as many people are downtown working. There aren't lunch meetings like there used to be before. The news still says stay away, stay home if you can, all that kind of stuff. So talk about maybe some of the steps you or others took to sort of help pivot to kind of reestablish business after your interruption.
So, we were all in survival mode. So one of the things that happens is some of the things you do because you want to do them, or because your guests like it that you do those things that you might not think are too profitable, but it's just part of kind of table stakes, part of what you have to do. All that went out the window. So all of us now are looking very hard and making every decision based on will this make us further behind? We're not thinking we're going to make a ton of money, be profitable, put money in our pocket, just not lose so much money, because you don't want to run out, right? You've got a few bucks in the bank account. January and February are, in our part of the country, aren't the best restaurant months of the year. So some of us, a lot of operators were pretty depleted at that time, right? When you're thinking it's going to start picking up, it doesn't, and you go the other way. This is before PPP loans were being funded, so we didn't know that was happening yet. And so for us, we closed for lunch instantly, right? When we reopened, we didn't know, there's nobody downtown. There's no reason to be open for lunch. Nobody's coming in. Lunch is already a difficult shift to make money on, we think. And so that was one of the instant kind of adjustments. A lot of operators reduced their hours, closed earlier. We created carryout platforms, Chow Now and DoorDash, Grubhub and Uber Eats all became household words, and you're trying to figure out how to do delivery. Those guys are taking 25 or 30% of the top. You got to decide whether that makes any sense, which it doesn't, except for if the alternative's not having anybody work at work, And then you're making decisions on what, we did think, or at least I thought, we're going to come out of it. This won't be forever. How hard? We don't know how long, we don't know how hard, but not forever. And what we didn't want to do is lose the connection with our people. I'm going to need those people. Yes, I don't have enough work for them right now, or any work, but I'm going to need them. I don't know if it's going to be in 2 months or 6 months or a year, but I'm going to need those people, or I'm not going to be able to survive and not going to be able to do what we do. So then you start making decisions, or we did. All right, what's going to keep as much of our team intact as possible, and how long can we do that for? So we're writing budgets saying, payroll's $100,000 a month across these concepts, and we're taking in 50. We lose 50 grand a month. How long can we do it? Type of thing, and just trying to schedule out and say, can we make it until Christmas, or can we make it until football season? At that time, we still had unrealistic hopes that maybe it'd be a football season. So, it was just a really interesting time in business. I'm really think that we'll come out. You've heard this a lot.
Yeah.
We're going to come out stronger. Most of my colleagues in the business say the same thing. We've learned so much navigating this pandemic that if we take those lessons learned and apply it in the future, we'll be better business people. We'll run better operations, and our guests will be happier. We're going to serve them better and safer. Our employees have learned to do things they never thought they'd have to do. So some of the little things we ask them to do are going to be a little easier. We find out what's important, right? Your colleagues that you work with, and your family, and your guests, and we're happy where we're at because we've learned so many great lessons.
Sure. You mentioned PPP, and I'm just curious. So your industry, one of the hardest hit, an early round of PPP dollars, and then a second round here recently. Has that helped sustain many restaurants in the industry through these difficult times? Does it help you keep those employees plugged in, or cover the adjustments that you've had to make inside your restaurants to accommodate?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say we wouldn't be here. Some of our concepts would be here. We probably likely would have closed others, possibly permanently. But I think for most restaurants, they'd never made it. Like the number you gave, 110,000 closings. I would say without PPP, that would be 500,000. 5 times as many restaurants would have closed. And I can tell you that 2.5 million jobs still gone, right? The restaurant industry, hospitality employs about 15 million people in this country, larger than anybody else, right? That's the airline industry gets a lot of attention, and they employ about 750,000. So we employ 20 times more people than they do. The PPP program kept us afloat in the spring and summer, and then many of us ran out of money and closed. PPP was 2.5 times an average month's payroll, so that's not a ton of money. And we burned through it. Everybody burned through it. And then we dip into savings, or we make adjustments. Without PPP, I would say just, in locally here, 75% of the restaurants wouldn't be open. So it was essential. And then the second draw, was the first thing that was slightly targeted towards hospitality. If you're a food service operator, you got 3.5 times a month's payroll instead of 2.5. That's the only thing that's been targeted to restaurants, is that little bit of an increase in that. There hasn't been any other targeted relief. So there's a lot of people in Congress who have who have introduced bills that would target the hospitality business. And of course, you know, selfishly, I hope that that happens. We need it still. We're still 2.5 million people below our peak employment, and at one time it was 8 million. So out of 15 million people that worked in the industry, over half had been furloughed at the peak of this. So that's an incredible number that nothing in history has ever matched anything like that, where 8 million people in one business got, you know, it's a big news when an auto plant with 2,500 employees is going to close. This was 8 million overnight. So yes, we needed the aid from the government, and we're thankful for it. I don't take it for granted. And I recognize that that's somebody's money. You know, I don't think of it as coming from outer space. This is people's tax dollars, and it's borrowed money. I recognize that too. However, it's an investment in what makes, you know, our communities what our communities are. And without restaurants, specifically local restaurants, things are different, right? I don't think it's just a, you know, quality of life just isn't the same if you can't go to the places you like to go to.
Right.
Jeff, you mentioned restaurants, and everybody mentions restaurants. Even harder hit were event businesses, and that's about half of our platform. But think about photographers and florists and cake bakers and anybody who supports the wedding industry. There haven't been any weddings for a year. Lots of those folks have been hit way harder even than the restaurants. I mean, our event business was down 75% last year. And the only reason it wasn't more is we did a little business in January and February. And then we opened up for a little while about August and September before it went south again. And we got a few events in. But if that doesn't come back soon, and we need even more help in the event business.
Sure. So, Kurt, let's look ahead a little bit and think about there's still some in our neighbors to the north still have some limitations on capacity in restaurants. There's still some limitations on events sizes in Indiana. What's the next few months look like? Are you hopeful that that those things start back up? Are there signs sort of starting to tell you that things may be more normal by summer?
Well, I certainly think more normal by summer. In Michigan, they're still at 25% capacity. The state of New York, which has the most robust contact tracing program in the country, concluded, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, that they traced all spread in the state of New York. And what they found was 75% of it was in your living room. It was small social gatherings in homes was 3/4 of the spread of COVID. I don't know if you saw the report, but what do you think restaurants and bars, they included bars, which I always want to separate bars and restaurants because I think bars probably spread a little more than restaurants, but combined restaurants and bars accounted for 1.4% of the COVID spread in the state of New York. That tells me that closing restaurants or limited to 25% makes no sense. It just doesn't make any sense. So I respectfully disagree with the people that make the decisions to have these places still be closed or at such reduced occupancy. There just isn't any data to support it. In fact, there is hard scientific data to refute it. Events, you know, the state of Indiana has event capacity, depending on what color your county is, at either 50% capacity or 100% capacity when you're in blue, which Elkhart County now is in blue. However, those two counties, St. Joe and Elkhart County, have much, much, much stricter requirements. I think in St. Joe County now we can have an event for up to 100 people. And this is the thing. So if I have, say, for instance, the Palais Royale Ballroom at 8,800 square feet, and I can only have 100 people in there, which is about 20% of its capacity. I don't understand how that makes sense when I can have, say, 150 people in Cafe Navarre, which is half the size. So I understand the need to have some guardrails, right? And we're trying to keep the population safe, which I support. Sometimes I think we might be going farther than science supports, and maybe making decisions that seem that it might be a little populist, right? So it sends a message that, okay, we're not there yet. We want you to still wear your mask, which I absolutely support. But I can't support sacrificing industries, entire industries, to help with messaging. So, when I am around town or the region, there's plenty of places that I think this doesn't feel really safe to me. There's a lot of people in a tight space, and they're considered essential, so they can do what they want. And then I have people, 10 feet apart in my restaurants, masked up, plexiglass barriers between tables, and all the things that we're doing. It does make it very safe, and I support doing it. I just, I want there to be some science and some balance behind some of these decisions. But I
Right.
am hopeful that that we'll start opening up, right? That it'll get better.
Great. So I'm continuing my conversation with Kurt Janowski. Kurt's the CEO over at the Navarre Hospitality. Kurt, we've got about 4 minutes left here, and just
Right.
wanted to, and I really appreciate this is a terrific conversation. So let's look ahead. You mentioned that the industry will change significantly going forward. You've learned a lot of lessons, throughout this that may change. So you and your peers. So let's just focus a little bit on what are some of those things that you've learned most from the pandemic that will influence, how you operate going forward.
Well, dining trends. Everybody's obviously doing a lot more carryout than they ever did. The industry predicts that will continue. I personally don't think it'll continue at the level that they think it is. I don't believe our product is food. I believe our product is a hospitality experience that isn't something we can deliver in a carryout format. So yes, some platforms make sense, right? If you're going to Chick-fil-A, it doesn't matter whether you get your chicken sandwich and eat it in the dining room or in your car. So obviously that makes a little more sense. A restaurant like Cafe Navarre, we're doing a tremendous amount of carryout now. I think that will subside. I can't see us doing that level because I don't know that that's going to satisfy what it is people are looking for. That's not really a Cafe Navarre experience. So the finer dining it is, the more that's going to go away. What I don't think will go away is outdoor dining. And, we've always been a little bit under, behind the curve a little bit on outdoor dining. People like it, but if it's just a little bit too cool, a little bit too windy, a little bit too warm, a little bit too much sun, people will opt out and go inside. I think that's over forever. I think people that might have used to have a window of 70 to 80 degrees, wind no higher than 10 miles an hour, and there better not be any bees in the area. Otherwise, it won't. I think that's over forever. I think it's going to be 55 degrees. I'll wear a jacket, meet outside. I think 85, it's hot, but I can still hang in there. The sun's bright, but I just enjoy outside dining. I think that's here forever. I think that will change even in this part of the country.
Great. I appreciate it. About 2 minutes there left. Kurt, I'm interested on the technology side. It feels to me that because of carry out and different things that your industry had to make a big pivot on the technology side. Talk about maybe those challenges or some of the things that restaurants needed to do to be ready for customers.
Right. Online ordering, everybody had to get that if they didn't have it before. And we were one of the companies that didn't have it before, although we knew there were platforms out there that did it. We just didn't have enough volume to make it make sense to pay the fees. So we added online ordering from our websites directly through a third party. It just makes more sense to, but a good one, right? A company we like partnering with, that the fees are fair. And then if you get a delivery option, then they partner with a different third party. So for us, it's ChowNow is the online ordering platform, and then they partner with DoorDash to deliver. And we find that to work really well. And then when we all talk to each other, those of us in the restaurant industry, we're all friendly competitors. Very few colleagues that I have hold their cards too close to the vest. They're really, people share information. So, most of us have made adjustments. We've redone our websites. And of course, all this costs money. And then when we're delivering or if you order a meal from any of our restaurants, Rocky River Tap and Table, say, some of what you're paying is going to fees to third parties. And of course, they're adding fees that the consumer picks up. So we're kind of splitting the cost a little bit, which is probably the most fair. And we're all trying to figure out how it works, and personally, I think I question, the delivery models, they can't seem to make money even charging us what they're charging. I don't know what the answer is there. I just don't get that. But we're all trying to figure out the way to make it, right?
Great.
We need to serve some food, keep our cooks busy, and serve our guests and keep our guests happy.
Kurt Janowski, my guest from Navarro Hospitality Group. Kurt, this is a fantastic conversation today. Really appreciate you helping us understand, and good luck as we go forward. We're hopeful that very soon we'll be back enjoying your great restaurants there.
We can't wait to see you. We can't wait to feed you.
Great. That's it for our show today. Thank you for watching on WNIT or listening to our podcast. To watch this episode again or any of our past episodes, you can find Economic Outlook at WNIT.org or find our podcast on most major podcast platforms. We also encourage you to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. I'm Jeff Ray. I'll see you next week.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.